Welcome back to another episode of Exposing D&D 5e Creatures CRs with Andrew. On today, we're going to be looking at another top favorited monster from my channel. And this time we're going to look at actual thumbs up rather than views. And this time, we're going to take a look at the Auth, which was recently released as a short not too long ago, and ended up with over 100 likes, which was probably the first time I've had anything that well received by the community, which is fantastic. And with that, let's dive right into the Auth monster. So the Auth is part of the Shoths and is a lawful neutral monster, technically an aberration, and they have 15 AC. They're also large and have 14 d10 hit dice with a constitution of 16, 14 wisdom, and 18 charisma. They are rated at a CR 5, and that's pretty much it for the base stats. With that out of the way, let's start looking at the skills section here and see that we have skills in Arcana, Perception, Persuasion, and Religion, which don't matter for this instant, but we also have damage resistance to Acid, Cold, and Fire. Since this triggers the 3 conditions for damage resistances or immunities, we're going to put that in place. And this nets the Auth an extra 1.5 times the hit points. So we'll see that it moves from 119 hit points to an effective 178 because of those resistances. And Fire's in there and is a pretty common type to deal with, especially with casters. Next we'll skip down into the traits section, and we'll see that we have Amorphous, which allows the Auth to slide through spaces as small as 1 inch, and this doesn't matter. Next we also have multiple roles, the Dripping Arcanist or the Paladin of Shoth. These will actually take no effect if you've actually seen the shorts for this monster, but we'll skip over this for now and come back to that later. Since these actually modify the base Auth, we're going to set that up first and then come back to this and see how each of these actually changes the CR. And with that, we will come and take a look at its actions. So our Auth has a multi-attack, and we'll use the combat workspace over here. And we'll see that both the other attacks that the Shoth uses has an attack of +6. So let's update this right now. And then we'll come back over here and take a look. Well, the Greatsword we can't use unless this is a Paladin. So we'll skip over the Greatsword after looking at the Oozing Slam. The Oozing Slam will deal 14 bludgeoning damage plus 2 acid damage. So we're looking at 14 plus 2 for a total of 16 damage. Now, if we were to also add in the Greatsword, we would see an additional 17 points of damage, which we'll use later on. On top of that, the Shoth also has Merge, which allows it to merge with other Auths or Shoths, which, unfortunately for this, doesn't really matter in terms of calculating the CR, because if there's no other Shoths around, then the Auth won't be able to regain hit points. And then lastly, we have Spray. The Auth sprays acid in a 30-foot cone, and people have to make a dex save or take 22 points of acid damage. Now, as it says in the custom monster section, we have to assume at least 2 failed targets, so this will be 22.5, because this is an odd number of dice, times 2 for a total of 45 points of damage. And then we will go back to our multi-attack. The Auth makes either 2 Oozing Slam attacks or 1 Oozing Slam and 1 Greatsword attack if it's a Paladin. So our multi-attack will end up being 2 of the Slam attacks for the time being, which will be up here in attack space number 1, and we'll just multiply that by 2. Now the nice thing is that the spray is actually dealing more damage, so we'll use that for round 1 here. And we will just copy that into round 1 for 45 damage there, and then we will copy the multi-attack as well. So then round 2 will be the 32 points of damage from U6, and then we will just copy round 2 into round 3, giving us a total of 36 damage for the full 3 rounds of combat. Now, the spreadsheet has already copied that over into the DPR, and taking into account the attack bonus. So for the OCR, we're looking at an OCR of 5 with an attack bonus of 6. Since the Auth already has a 6, there's going to be no shift here, and our Auth is offensively a CR 6. Now for our hit points, we're looking at 178 effective hit points with an AC of 15. Because of that, our auth is in the DCR section of an 8 with an expected AC of 16, considering that it only has 15, that's -1 under the expected, and there's no shift again to the DCR section. And when we average this all out, we're going to have 8 plus the 5, which will net us 13, which then averages to 6.5, and then we round up to a CR7, which is what we have here. And in our printed book, it's suggesting that this is supposed to be a CR5. So let's see what happens if we modify this to a CR7. Alright, nothing changes here, luckily, in the bonuses for the resistance. So our auth is still a CR7, which is an underrating of 2 CR levels. Now, let's take a look at the multiple roles here and see how this can change things around a little bit. First off, let's do the Paladin of Shoth. This is going to be the easier one since the Paladin itself will gain an extra +2 AC bonus, and then it also has that it starts any non-Shoth creatures that starts its turn within 5 feet of the auth must succeed on a DC 15 Charisma saving throw or be blinded by the light of Shoth. Alright, so the only thing we have here that's really affecting this monster is the +2 AC bonus. So if we simply just switch the base AC from 15 to 17, we're going to see that there's no change again anyways, because the 15 was hovering around the 16, and then that bump up to 17 again is only going to be +1 over rather than -1 under. This still keeps us at the CR7 for our Paladin auth. Let's also take a look at the damage changes really quick, because our auth is no longer doing 2 slams attack, and instead we are also doing a greatsword attack. This is going to give us a little bit more damage, but still nothing near enough. I mean, we were pretty close with the 38. We would need 39 or higher to be shifting up into the, OCR6 territory, but that still wouldn't change the fact that this would still be a CR7 auth. Let's take a look at what would happen with the Dripping Arcanist feature here. Well, we have Firebolt at 2d10, which would be an average of 11 damage per use. Light and Thaumaturgy won't help. Magic Missile will be cast at its base, since this is innate spellcasting. So this would only be a level 1 Magic Missile spell, which isn't going to help us out at all here. But the Fireball spell may actually help. And Fireball cast at level 3 is netting us a total of 56 points of damage. And we can do that once per day. So what we could do here then is switch out one of these rounds of multi-attack to the 56 points of average damage. Since round 1 we could do the spray attack, and then round 2 we could say Fireball, and then round 3 we could do a multi-attack. Regardless of how you work these rounds of combat, we're still going to look at pretty much an average of 44 damage per round for the first 3 rounds of combat. And because of that, our OCR actually shifts from the 5 to a 6, and we're getting a little bit more damage from the Dripping Arcanist auth rather than the Paladin auth. So the Paladin is going to be more of a protector, while the Arcanist is going to be more of a damage dealer. So what else could we do to modify our auth? You know, we could try and play around with some more spells and change up some of these others, like Augury or Detect Thoughts. Those are very thematic spells that are probably helping with what the auth really is. But, I don't know, I wouldn't really mess around with this too much. You know, maybe we could do the typical magic resistance, but that's just going to bump the DCR up a section and increase our final CR to an 8. So, the use of magic resistance is going to immediately fix that one way or the other, at least for the Paladin. For the Arcanist isn't going to change at all. The Arcanist is going to stay at a CR7, meanwhile the Paladin with magic resistance would be a CR8. So, in effect, I really wouldn't bother with modifying the auth. They're a pretty unique monster, especially since you can get 2 for 1 in this stat block. Okay, let's move into encounter building and fighting the auth some way or the other. Now, normally I would suggest using the challenge rating that's printed in the book, but because we found a challenge rating 2 steps higher than what's printed here, I'm going to suggest we use the 7. And if we use the CR7 that we found here, we would start with 4 characters at 5th level for an epic encounter against 1 auth. we could probably see this being fought with 5 characters somewhere between 4th and 5th level, and again with 6 players somewhere between 4th and 5th level. And then if you wanted to use the Auth at CR7 against multiple monsters, you would start by placing 6 players against one of these at 6th level, 5 players at 7th level, 4 players at 8th and 9th level, and 3 players at 10th level. Now, as I always say, when you have, generally speaking, you're probably going to have an average of 4 players at your table. So this is where you're going to start seeing at least one Auth show up as a regular, hard encounter, somewhere around 8th to 10th level. Once you get to 10th level, then you can start throwing in extra monsters. So if your table has 4 players, you could use 3 of those players to fight against one of the Auth, and then you could probably throw in a CR3 or a 4. And then moving on, we can start using 2 players against one Auth at 11th to 14th level, and then you can do a 1-to-1 basis with one of these CR7 Auths at 15th and above. And there you have it. Here is the Auth from the Creature Codex book by Kobold Press. A monster that is a little underrated, but not as underrated as some of the other monsters we've taken a look at. Join me again next week as we deconstruct another monster from D&D 5th edition and take a look at its CR to see what is going on with these monsters.